The name for Chateau Angelus was inspired by a common everyday event. On a daily basis, the workers in the nearby vineyards in Saint-Emilion would hear the sound of bells ringing from 3 local churches. That sound inspired the now famous name for Chateau Angelus, as well as its logo and a sculpture in the backyard of the estate. Chateau Angelus has been one of the very best producers in Bordeaux, and especially in Saint-Emilion on Bordeaux's Right Bank, since at least 1989. Before that, it was definitely a bit of an underachiever, so I would be careful buying any vintages that predate 1989. The tremendous improvements in quality at Angelus in 1989 were driven by the implementation of a number of improvements both in the vineyard and in the winery. Examples include parcel-by-parcel vinification and farming, green harvesting to reduce yields, harvesting later in the growing season so they could harvest perfectly ripe berries, and also using a much more strict selection of fruit. In the winery, Angelus began to ferment whole berries. Oak barrels were used for malolactic fermentation, and they began to mature the wines in 100% new French oak. While these techniques are all commonplace today, Angelus was very much a front-runner back in the late 1980s when it started to implement these techniques. While most Right Bank Bordeaux producers are dominant in Merlot, Angelus was one of the earliest proponents of Cabernet Franc, and that's certainly reflected both in the vineyard and in the final blend. Angelus has 42 hectares of vines that are planted to 50% Merlot, 47% Cabernet Franc, and 3% Cabernet Sauvignon. As you might expect, the Angelus Merlot is planted in soils that have clay and limestone, whereas the Cabernet Franc is planted on soils that are more gravel, limestone, and sand. Angelus began to use organic farming techniques in 2018 and was certified organic beginning with the 2021 vintage. Angelus continues to emphasize a strict selection of fruit for its wines. They embrace optical sorting equipment, but they don't stop there, as once the optical sorting is completed, they also do a separate manual selection just to make sure the optical sorting equipment didn't miss anything. Angelus continues to mature its wines in 100% new French oak for between 18 to 24 months depending on the vintage. Significantly, the first 8 months of this maturation is on the lees, which helps to extract a little bit more color, texture, and richness. It's always a treat to taste Chateau Angelus. This is a rich, full-bodied, concentrated wine, but it's also a wine with opulent, luscious fruit. Flavors and aromas include dark, spicy fruit, licorice, and truffle. It's capable of aging for decades. In fact, the tremendous 1990 Angelus is one of my all-time favorite Right Bank wines. Every year, I do a video with my top 25 wines for the past year, and the 1990 Angelus has made the top 15 on a couple different occasions in recent years. An example of the blend for Chateau Angelus is the 2022 vintage. This is an exceptional effort from Angelus in perhaps one of their best all-time wines. This wine is a blend that consists of 60% Merlot and 40% Cabernet Franc. The 2022 Angelus should be arriving on store shelves soon. It received tremendous critical acclaim. This one sells for right around $475 per bottle or so. So if you're a fan of Angelus, that's definitely one you'll want to add to your collection. Some of my other favorite vintages of Angelus, besides 1990, include the 2000, 2003, 2005, 2008, 9, and 10, 2012, and then 2015 and 16, 2018, 19, and 20. So you really can't go wrong with any of those vintages. While I was at the winery, I also tried the 2011 vintage. While this isn't one of the more highly acclaimed vintages for Angelus, it's a wine that's very enjoyable and which is in a nice window for drinking currently. So if that's something you have in your cellar, you might want to give it a try in the near term. During my visit, I learned that Angelus was also in the midst of a complete overhaul of its winemaking facilities. Among other things, they're going to be installing a gravity flow system, which should help to improve the wines even further down the road. In addition to its top wine, Angelus also has an excellent second wine that it's been making since 1987. Carillon d'Angelus is a wine that's typically a Merlot dominant blend, often about 90% or so, And then there's smaller amounts of Cabernet Franc and sometimes a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon as well. For example, I tried the 2019 vintage at the winery, and that was a blend that consisted of 90% Merlot and 10% Cabernet Franc. The fruit for this wine comes from a variety of sources, not just from the fruit that's around the estate, but sometimes fruit from two other sectors as well. This is wine that has a bit more of a red fruit profile. It's much more approachable than the top wine, and it's one that you can enjoy a few years after release, and it will certainly age well in your cellar for up to 12 to 15 years or so. The 2022 vintage is one that will sell for around $120 per bottle, so you can get about 4 bottles of this second wine for the price of 1 bottle of the top wine. If you enjoyed this video, I've published dozens of other videos about Bordeaux. If you'd like to learn more, please be sure to check out the playlist that's linked above.